Welcome to episode 16 of the Motorcar Marketing Podcast. I'm Ashley Myers with motorcarmarketing.com. In this episode's main segment, I'm going to be talking with Mike Elliott. Mike works with PayJunction, helping car dealers process credit cards. He's got a lot of great information explaining some strategies to help car dealers lower their processing fees. So if you process credit cards at your dealership, you're not going to want to miss this episode. So stay tuned for that. If you find this episode valuable, please help us out by giving us a review in iTunes or leaving a comment on YouTube or retweeting the podcast on Twitter or liking us on Facebook. These social media shares really do help spread the word about the podcast, so it's very much appreciated. If you have any comments or questions about anything, feel free to send us an email at info@motorcarmarketing.com. I want to improve this podcast, so some honest, constructive feedback is always very much appreciated. A couple of quick notes. Any websites or links that I mention in the podcast can be found on the website in the show notes. I also publish a transcript with every episode in case you'd rather read the show or look at something later on. You can find all the podcast show notes at www.motorcarmarketing.com/podcasts. We recently put together a great free guide for car dealers called the Quick Start Auto Dealer Marketing Guide. If you can get it by going to motorcarmarketing.com/guide. It's completely free. You just put in your email address and the lessons will be emailed to you over the course of the next few days. We've tried to concentrate on the high leverage things you can do with each marketing channel so you can get the maximum results in the shortest amount of time. We'll be adding more lessons to this guide in the future, but to start out, we'll show you how to increase your ROI and sell more cars on Craigslist. How to quickly set up a Google pay-per-click campaign, how to begin generating leads from local search engine optimization, and how to effectively use email marketing to generate leads and correspond with your past customers. Again, this guide is completely free. Just go to motorcarmarketing.com/guide. So now let's get into the main segment. Today, I'm talking with Mike Elliott about credit card processing for car dealers. Here's the interview. Welcome, Mike, to the Motorcar Marketing Podcast. I really appreciate you coming on the show.
Ashley, thanks for having me. I appreciate an opportunity to chat.
So to start out, I wonder if you can give us a quick overview of your career and how you got into working with car dealers specifically and credit card processing.
Sure thing. Was in sales for many, many years. Had a friend who really got me involved with the company I work for and with the process I work for a few years ago. Was looking to do something that took into account new technology, which has always interested me, and that's really what made me gravitate towards it. Second reason, I think, because I come from kind of a blue-collar background, I just really love car dealers and car owners, car dealership owners. Just the atmosphere in a dealership is very relaxed. I like that. Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about, car dealers and processing credit cards. To start out, maybe you can just kind of give us an overview. How do credit card processors set their rates for merchants? And then even specifically, how do they set rates for like a car dealership?
Basically, everybody is paying the same wholesale rates. The processors all pay an identical rate for any particular card. So there tend to be two paths that card processors go down. They either cluster different types of cards that cost different amounts to process into buckets or tiers, and that's sort of the old school way of doing it. So, for example, there's over 150 Visa cards. Well, any one of those cards, if it gets processed, has a specific cost. And I don't want to get too much into the weeds on it, but the old school way of doing it was to maybe have a bucket or a tier and say, these kinds of cards, I'm going to charge you 2%, and these types of cards I'm going to charge you 3%, and these type 3.5%, and just cluster them in there, and then basically make their profit on the markup between what it actually cost and that amount, and that's the old school way of setting rates for dealers. And I would say any dealer, big or small, has kind of experienced that in terms of negotiating or speaking with a card processor who set their dealership up.
Now, just to be clear, when you say these different types of buckets, maybe you can give us a real concrete example of like what would determine, like why would one card be more expensive to process than another? What would, some exact examples of what would go in bucket A versus bucket B?
That's a great question. The thing that always should go in bucket A, the absolute least expensive thing to process, is a debit card. Like my wife and I use our debit cards all the time because it leaves a paper trail. Those things cost pennies to process. So let's say that definitely well under 1% for any kind of debit card. A major credit card that doesn't have cash back, doesn't have an affinity, tends to be in that lower price as well. High price would be things like, let's say I have a MasterCard and it's connected to my university, has a cute picture of the mascot on it, and there's a benefit to my university because there's a little bit of money flowing, out of the use of that card. Those extra fees, those extra expenses have to be paid for somewhere. So an affinity card, like a university card, that benefits them, or a cashback card, is going to be more expensive to process every other element considered. And then there's the element of risk. If you swipe a card, the chances that the data is accurate is much higher than if you punch it in manually. Like maybe I'm making a phone order and I'm repeating my Visa number over to the person taking the order. There's a higher risk that there'll be an issue or a problem with that data versus if I swipe it at my local Walmart or Target.
Mm-hmm. I see. And and is volume another big consideration in terms of getting the rates? It always seems like when I've dealt with these processors, the more you do, the better the rate they'll give you.
I would say on the buyer's end, yes. In terms of the processor, no matter how little or how much you process with Visa or MasterCard, for example, you get the same rate. So I could be the smallest processor in the country, and you give me your Visa, I'm paying the same wholesale cost as a big processing company. But if you flip it around, if I'm a dealer and I've got 7 locations and I've got a much higher volume of transactions of processed cards, well, there's a lot more processing fees, there's a lot more money there, and in general, somebody who processes a lot more volume should get better rates from his processing company.
I see. A couple things I just want to back up on. You mentioned the debit card being the cheapest one. I notice when I go, as an example, I go to the gas station and I put my debit card in there. Sometimes it'll ask for a PIN number, but sometimes it'll ask for the zip code as if it thinks it's a credit card. Is that meaning it's not making the determination that it's a debit card, and would that affect then the rate?
It should be able to determine it's a debit card, and you know this, that you can use your debit card as a credit card or a debit card in most of these swipe terminals. Mm-hmm. Normally, that's more of an internal process to avoid fraud. I don't know if you've noticed where you're at or what part of town or maybe you're in another city. What I found from being around the country is I'm more prone to have to put in my 5-digit billing code when I'm at a station that looks like it has a lot more transient traffic. Okay. Maybe we could back it up too a little bit and just get some clarification. You keep mentioning getting the wholesale rates from Visa. So maybe you could just explain so that we have kind of an understanding of what the levels are between basically your car dealer and then Visa, who is, I guess at the top of the hill, and then, how many businesses are sort of between, and what are these different tiers of business, the wholesalers and that kind of thing? One thing that I think a lot of dealers don't know, and I encourage dealers to do this, is that the actual cost, the true cost for the processor, it's all public knowledge. I'll give you an example. If you go on Google or Bing and you put in Visa wholesale rates or Visa interchange rates, which is the term the industry uses, you'll pull up a PDF, maybe it's 10, 20 pages, of nothing but card types and the actual cost. So it's all public knowledge.
And that's what Visa is charging to the merchants that process the cards.
Exactly. Every merchant is paying that same wholesale rate. Same thing for MasterCard. Amex is a little more expensive. They do their own thing, but really the high volume for car dealers is Visa, MasterCard, really more so than Discover or American Express. That's where their main.
And there's no difference. I mean, there's got to be some of these, processing companies that do a lot more volume. Visa is strictly, the pricing is the same for all of Visa's customers. There's never any differentiating. Like, they don't have certain factors like these processors do more volume, so we give them a better rate.
That's correct, and I was very surprised when I first got into the industry to find that out. I understand that on the buyer's side, the dealer should get a better deal and should command a better deal for having more volume to process. But it was shocking to me. But the rates are the rates. I don't know absolutely why that is. I think because credit cards are so tightly controlled, financial instruments that's why the wholesale price is it, and it's all on the internet. And I tell dealers that all the time. I'm like, go look it up for yourself if you'd like, or go throw some paper in the printer and print it up, because it's a pretty long list, and it'll list everything for you.
Okay, so now let's just talk about, just in broad strokes, and maybe dealers will kind of know what rates they're paying. Can you tell us very roughly what a car dealer should be paying for some of these different, buckets of processing?
Sure. I would say one of the best ways to just determine the percentage you ought to be at, and it depends on the mix of cards, is you really shouldn't be anywhere near 3%. If you're maybe under 2, that's probably good. If you're in the 2 to 3 range, that's probably okay, and it really depends on the types of cards that you accept. One great example, I think, is people that do buy here, pay here, or have situations where people are using debit cards a lot should have a very, very low cost, for the reason I mentioned, because their mix is very low price cards. If you're under 2%, there's a good probability that you're getting really good rates. The only way to know for sure is to analyze the statement that you get, look at all the fees and everything else that's added on to that number they gave you, and divide it by your total volume, and that gives you your actual percentage.
Mm-hmm. Can you tell us, like, roughly what sort of fees they should be paying, per transaction fee, a monthly fee? What do those fees usually add up to?
I would say when you aggregate them, that's where you want to be not too far over 2%, because some companies will charge a use fee or like a flat fee plus a certain amount, for each kind of card. That's more common in the industry when somebody's very small and just doesn't have much volume. Most car dealers, unless they're just a little mom and pop that sells maybe a car a week, any full service dealer is going to be doing volume where that's not going to be an issue. And honestly, they shouldn't be paying any kind of monthly maintenance fees. But whether they are not, if they just take their total cost, the bottom line of what they get charged with all the fees added together, divided by the gross volume of what they process that month, that'll give them their actual percentage. So they may say, well, I've got 2% on most of the cards, and et cetera, and they may calculate it and find out that they're 2.9 or 3.1 because of how the different cards are put into different buckets or how they're marked up.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's say a dealership does that. I guess I basically get what you're saying is that everything in aggregate, and you're saying a buy here, pay here dealership, since they're processing so many debit cards, that's going to bring this aggregate number down. But the bottom line is, if you're somewhere around 2%, you're good. If you're around 3%, you're probably a little high. What can a dealership then do if they find that they're closer to the 3% than the 2%?
One thing they could do is actually talk to other processing companies and ask them to, I wouldn't say bid, but analyze and explain to them where the markup is and why they're getting to that point. They might have a richer mix of affinity cards, cashback cards, and that would impact the cost to the processor. But in general, a full-service dealer, because of the sheer volume of activity, the mix of business that most of them get all around the country is really very, very similar, even in different cities and different communities. So I would say if I was over 2.3 or 2.5, I'd probably want to have someone other than my current rep just analyze it for me, show me what the true wholesale cost was, and show me where the markup is. What I found doing that with people is that sometimes some cards aren't maybe put in the bucket that the dealer would expect them to be in, meaning they get marked up quite a bit, and that's where a lot of those hidden costs come in. What you could describe in vernacular as kind of nickel and diming, but that adds up quite a bit, if you're processing a couple $100,000 a month.
Yeah, yeah. Can a car dealership, could they reject certain cards or say, no, we're not going to take what you were calling a university or a cash back card. We'll only take the debit cards. Are they allowed to do that?
They are, and the best example is Amex, and honestly, it kind of surprises me as a consumer. But look at all the stores and all the retail establishments that take Visa, MasterCard, but don't take American Express because it's a little more expensive to process. If they're logical about that, they must have a really, really small profit margin because Amex does cost a little more to process. I can't tell you the exact number, to be honest, off the top of my head. It's a little more expensive, but not a lot. But I find a lot of retail merchants don't take Amex. That surprises me.
Yeah, yeah. And a lot of the dealerships I work with, I know that they will offer a cash discount. So if you're going to pay with credit card, they're going to basically wrap whatever it is, that 2 or 3% into the cost for the for the person. Is Visa and MasterCard, do they allow that? Do they care that these dealerships are doing that?
If the dealership is accepting cash, they're not processing through Visa and MasterCard. I guess if it happens in large numbers, Visa and MasterCard don't get as much volume. I think that's great for the consumer. I love seeing a merchant do that if you pay me cash, I'm going to give you that discount because basically you're lowering my costs and I'm going to pass it on to you. I think that tells me that dealer is very consumer focused. So I like that quite a bit.
Yeah, yeah. So one thing, and we've kind of discussed this, but I wrote this down as a question, and I just wanted to kind of throw it at you because it's always been, in my experience, I've done a lot of different e-commerce, and so I've been on the phone a lot of times when I'm trying to negotiate these rates. And I got to tell you, like you mentioned this Visa interchange rates, to Google that, and I'm sure that I will go take a look at that. But one of the things that's always been frustrating to me, and I'm sure car dealers that are doing this, is that it seems like they make it overly complicated. Like when I've done this where I've tried to get two companies to bid against each other, it just is, they quote so many numbers and it's so complicated that it's very difficult to get like an apples to apples comparison from one. And maybe it's just because I'm not familiar enough with these terms that the terminology might be slightly different. But I've just never been able to quite get this apples to apples comparison, trying to get different companies to bid against each other. Is there any advice you might have for me in a car dealership that's facing that?
And I would contend, and I sound a little cynical, but I think there's some intention of that where the information isn't transparent, it isn't shared with the client. One thing that reminded me of listening to you is how technology, and especially the internet, has really affected consumerism. It's really made everybody in manufacturing and in sales have so much more information. The customers have so much more information in front of them. Using your example, I would have multiple companies take the same exact mix of cards, the same exact statement, and tell me what they would charge me for that statement. Because that way I've got apples to apples. Your mix will be a little different every month, but over time you're going to have those same trends over and over. What we do is we ask for a minimum of 2, preferably 3 months in a row, so we can account for some of that cyclical nature of what happens. The classic example is heading into the holidays, people tend to use their credit cards a lot more. They don't have a lot of cash flow. So you get a lot more credit card usage in general, where you might get debit card usage in place of that during other months. But you're right. I think it's done intentionally. I think that it's more confusing than it needs to be. It should be transparent. You should be able to sit down with your vendor and they say, you processed 1,000 different cards and, here's the entire list of what you did and how many and the dollar amounts, and you can do the algebra. You can do the math yourself to see how we came up with it.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a great tip, though. Doing what you're saying with the statements, if you pull up your statements and then give those to the companies, then it'll be much more clear as far as an apples to apples comparison. Mm-hmm. That's a good tip. So let's talk a bit about PayJunction and loweroperatingcosts.com. Can you kind of just give us maybe the 2-minute elevator speech about what those are and how they could potentially help car dealers?
Oh, absolutely. Lower dealer costs, which is me, is really just my individual brand in terms of representing PayJunction to the full service and the mom and pop dealerships both. PayJunction has been in business for about 13 years. They process over $1 billion. They're backed by a very, very large national bank, the Bank of Omaha, and more importantly, I represent them because I think they're great people. They're honest. They're forthright in an industry that certainly could use more of that. It could use more transparency. And that's what attracted me to those individuals. They're California-based. And those folks that worked for them was that they were very honest people. They were very upfront, and that appeals to me as a salesperson. Mm-hmm. My interest is somewhat more individually. LowerDealerCost.com is simply my branding of what I try to do for dealerships and for shops, is deliver that service and that product.
Perfect. So maybe you can just tell us exactly what PayJunction offers in terms of what a dealership can use them for.
Basically, PayJunction will offer proprietary software that's web-based, cloud-based, that will process any credit cards, any debit cards. They've even added a function for dealers that want to process checks electronically so they don't have to go to the bank. Basically, it's what I would call a lock key system in that you literally can sign up for an account, plug things in, go on the web, and you're on and you're live. It's such a simple system. It's amazing how simple it is. But because it's cloud-based, everything's happening in real time. That also means that anything that changes with any credit card anywhere, the moment the industry is made aware of that change, it happens instantaneously for your dealership. There's no programming or anything involved. Everything's in real time on the cloud. Mm-hmm.
Perfect. So what's the best way for people to keep up with you and potentially contact you if they want to learn more?
Oh, I appreciate you asking. If they're on Twitter, I'm at Lower Dealer Cost. Or they can go to the website, lowerdealercost.com, and there's a contact page. They can put a little blurb in about what they want to ask about, and that's probably the easiest way to reach me.
Perfect. I will put those in the show notes, so if someone's listening to this in the car or something, they just can find the show notes, and then I'll put direct links in the show notes. They can click on over to that. Well, Mike, you've been very generous with your time. I know I've learned a lot about processing credit cards. I think this has been very informative, and I think car dealers will get a lot out of it.
Well, I hope they do, Ashley, and I appreciate your time as well. Thanks for letting me come on and talk about cards.
If you're currently looking for a high-quality auto dealer website, check out our sister site, motorcarsites.com. We offer high-quality auto dealer websites at a very affordable price. Dealers can typically save between $50 and $150 per month by using our service. You can upload as many cars as you'd like at no additional cost. We automatically can export your cars to all the major platforms like Cars.com and AutoTrader, so you don't have to manage your inventory in multiple locations. We can have your new website up and running usually in less than 24 hours. Setup is free and easy, and there are no long-term contracts, so you can cancel at any time. Again, check out motorcarsites.com to learn more. Just a quick thought on today's interview with Mike. I've done credit card processing for a variety of businesses over the years, so I know it can be really complicated, and it's a real pain in the neck to constantly be calling these companies and trying to compare rates. To me, though, the big takeaway is doing exactly what Mike recommends. Get your past statements and then have a new company look at them and see if they can save you any money. This really will be an apples-to-apples comparison, and you should know pretty quickly if you can do better. Shopping around can definitely save you a lot of money, especially if you're processing some significant volume each month. These processing companies are hungry for business, so never just settle. Good luck. Hopefully this episode has been helpful. So anyways, that's our show. Thanks for listening.